There's a moment, and I know this sounds strange, where you can feel a crowd hold its breath. Not pause, not quiet down, actually hold its breath. Like every single person standing in that courtyard decided at the exact same second to stop inhaling. I've been to Buckingham Palace maybe a dozen times over the years. Twice for official visits, a handful of times as a tourist just wandering through London with nowhere particular to be. I've seen the changing of the guard so many times I could probably recite the timing in my sleep. I've watched tourists do ridiculous things trying to get a reaction, silly faces, fake cries, pretend fainting. I've seen a man in a full banana costume stand 6 inches from a guardsman's face for 3 solid minutes. Nothing worked, nothing ever works. That's what makes what I witnessed on a Tuesday morning in late October so difficult to fully explain, because what happened wasn't loud at first. It didn't announce itself. And by the time it was over, people were standing there with this look on their faces like they'd just watched something they hadn't quite processed yet. I'm still processing it, honestly. It had been raining since early morning. That fine, miserable London drizzle that doesn't actually fall so much as hover, the kind that fogs your glasses and soaks through your jacket collar before you even realize it's happening. The sky was that flat, gray color that makes everything look like an old photograph. The kind of October morning where you think about turning back, going for a coffee somewhere warm, and calling it a day. But there were still maybe 200 people gathered along the railings, outside the palace. Tourists mostly, Japanese students with matching red backpacks, a group of Italian teenagers who kept taking selfies and ignoring the historical significance of literally everything around them. A German couple with a laminated map that had been rained on so many times it was nearly transparent. And then the usual mix of Londoners, not tourists, just people who'd ended up there, killing time or meeting someone or walking through on their way to somewhere else. I was one of those. I'd come from a breakfast meeting near Victoria that had ended early and figured I'd walk through St. James's Park. Then the drizzle started, and I ended up standing under a tree near the main gate because it offered slightly more cover than nothing at all. The guardsmen were at their posts. There were 2 of them visible from where I stood, one inside the gate on the left side, one to the right of the central arch. Full ceremonial uniform, the long red tunics, the bearskin hats that always look vaguely impossible given their size, completely still. The way they stand isn't just discipline, there's something almost architectural about it. Like they're part of the building itself, like someone has placed 2 red pillars beside the gate and painted faces on them. I've always respected that, actually. Most people don't understand how physically demanding it is to stand that way. The control it requires, not just over your body, but over your reactions, over your face. He arrived around 10:20. I noticed him before anything happened, which, in hindsight, makes sense. He was the type of person you notice. Not because he was loud, not immediately anyway, but because of the way he moved. There's a particular kind of walk some people have, a deliberate chest-forward stride that announces I am here before they've said a single word. He was tall. Maybe 6'1", 6'2", mid-40s I'd guess, though he carried himself like he was trying to subtract a decade. Dark training jacket, the kind with a sports brand logo on the chest. Black trousers tucked slightly into athletic shoes. He was with 2 other men, younger, maybe mid-20s. They were talking and laughing, and from the body language it was clear the older man was the one in charge of whatever dynamic existed between them. He was explaining something, gesturing with his hands, making points. At one point, as they approached the main crowd gathered near the railings, he stopped and did something that caught my attention immediately. He rolled his neck, then his shoulders, then raised both arms slowly and let them fall back down, like he was warming up for something. It was such a specific, deliberate motion in a context where it made absolutely no sense. The people nearby barely noticed. The Italian teenagers were still taking selfies. The German couple was consulting their soggy map. But I watched him. He went to the left side first, to the guardsman inside the gate, the one slightly closer to the public walkway. He stood in front of him for a long moment, just staring. Not smiling, not performing for anyone, just looking at the guardsman with this expression that I can only describe as assessing, the way you might look at something you were about to test. The guardsman didn't move, didn't blink as far as I could tell. Then the man said something. I was too far to hear the words, but the delivery was visible, short, clipped, deliberate. He pointed at the guardsman with 2 fingers. Then he crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly, like he was waiting for an answer that was never going to come. Nothing. Of course. One of the younger men behind him laughed quietly, nervous, almost. The kind of laugh people make when they're not sure something is a good idea, but they're not going to be the one to say so. The man uncrossed his arms, rolled his right shoulder once. And then he raised his palm, flat, deliberate, and brought it forward in a slow, theatrical karate-style strike, stopping about 6 inches from the guardsman's arm. Not contact. Not quite. It was a demonstration. A look-what-I-could-do move performed for an audience that was just beginning to notice him. A few people in the crowd looked over. A child pointed. The father pulled the child's hand down and gave the man a look. I watched the guardsman. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance. His jaw was set. He gave nothing. The man turned to his companions, said something, and they both laughed, properly this time. He was pleased with himself. There was satisfaction on his face, the particular brand of satisfaction that comes from someone who has decided that self-restraint is weakness rather than discipline. He turned back. And this is where it shifted. Because the second time wasn't a demonstration. He stepped closer. I think he crossed the visitor line, though in the moment nobody shouted anything or intervened, and brought his palm forward with more force. A genuine strike. Not full speed, nothing that could be called a real attack, but enough to make contact. The back of his open hand caught the guardsman on the upper arm. It wasn't a hard blow, but it was deliberate, it was contact. The crowd reaction happened in stages. First, a small ripple of awareness, people who'd been half watching now fully watching, then a murmur. Then the intake of breath I mentioned at the start, that collective pause. The man stepped back slightly and looked at the guardsman with this expression, triumphant almost, like he'd won something. The guardsman moved. Not dramatically, not in the way films would have you believe, no sudden lunge, no shout, no drawn sword sweeping through the air in slow motion, nothing like that. It was actually the control of it that hit people so hard. The guardsman turned his head. Directly and precisely he turned to face the man. He looked at him, and then he spoke. I've replayed this in my head so many times, trying to get the wording exactly right. What I remember, and a woman standing close to me confirmed this afterward, so I know I didn't imagine it, was something close to this. Sir, you've made contact with a serving member of His Majesty's Guard. Step back behind the line now. This is your one instruction. Flat, completely flat, no aggression, no heat, the way you might explain to someone where the nearest bus stop is. But underneath it, and this is the part I can't fully describe in words, there was something else in the voice. Not a threat, not performance, just an absolute absence of doubt. The kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud because it was never uncertain in the first place. The man's face changed. It didn't crumble, it didn't go pale. But something moved behind his eyes, and whatever it was not what he expected to feel in that moment. I think he had prepared himself for one of two outcomes. The guard stays frozen and he walks away victorious, or the guard reacts wildly and he ducks away, laughing. He had not prepared for calm. He had not prepared for someone looking at him like that. Like he was being managed. One of the younger men behind him reached forward and touched his arm, said something quietly. The man didn't move immediately. He was still looking at the guardsman, and the guardsman was still looking at him. Then a police officer appeared. They hadn't come running, there was no sprint, no alarm. He simply materialized at the edge of the scene the way police do when they've been watching longer than you realized. Calm, big, unhurried. Everything all right here? He asked, though it wasn't really a question. The man with the karate jacket seemed to make a decision. He looked at the police officer, then back at the guardsman. Then he said something short. I think it was an attempt at a joke, something dismissive, and turned away. His companions fell in beside him immediately, and I noticed they created a slight distance between themselves and him as they walked, the way people do when they want proximity without association. The guardsman reset. That's the only word for it. Head forward, eyes forward, body still, back to the wall, back to the post. Like nothing had happened, which is both the most impressive thing I've ever seen, and somehow also the saddest. The crowd took a minute to decompress. People looked at each other, strangers making eye contact over something shared. A few people were on their phones, having clearly recorded part of it. The woman near me made a sound between a laugh and a sigh. "Can you believe that?" she said, not really to me, more to the air in front of her. I could believe it, actually. That's the uncomfortable part. There's a type of person who looks at discipline and sees an invitation. who looks at restraint and reads it as weakness, who looks at someone who will not respond and decides that silence is the same as submission. I've met versions of that man in offices, in car parks, at dinner tables. The karate jacket was almost beside the point. It was just the costume for that particular performance. What I keep thinking about is the preparation, the neck roll, the shoulder warm-up. He had prepared. He decided before he even arrived at that gate that he was going to do something, that he was going to prove something. And what I wonder, and I'll never know the answer, is what he was actually trying to prove and to who. Not to the guardsman. The guardsman was never the point. To the younger men walking beside him, maybe. To himself, possibly. I stayed another 20 minutes after it happened. The crowd thinned out as the drizzle thickened slightly, and people gave up on waiting for something else interesting to occur. The Italian teenagers eventually moved toward the park. The German couple finally folded their ruined map away and walked off toward the memorial. The guardsman stood. Same position, same stillness, same eyes on the middle distance. If anyone watching for the first time had walked up in those 20 minutes, they'd have seen nothing unusual at all. Just a man in a red uniform and a tall black hat standing at his post outside a very large and very famous building. Which is exactly the point, I think. I've thought about what it takes to stand like that. Not just physically, the hours of it, the weather, the aching back, and the frozen feet in October, but mentally. To have spent years training your response so completely that even contact, actual, deliberate contact from a stranger who wants a reaction, produces nothing but a measured, controlled reply and a return to post. There's no version of that man in the karate jacket that wins against that. He could have been 3 times as skilled, could have had tournament medals on every wall of his house, could have broken every board in every dojo in South London, and it wouldn't have mattered one bit. Because the guardsman wasn't playing the same game. He never was. I walked back through St. James's Park after that. The rain had softened to almost nothing, just a faint gray mist clinging to the trees. A few ducks were doing whatever ducks do in October, moving slowly along the edge of the water, entirely unbothered by any of it. I thought about discipline that morning. The real kind. Not the kind that shouts its credentials at you, not the kind that needs an audience to feel valid. The kind that just holds. That stands at its post regardless of what's thrown at it and does its job and goes home at the end of a shift having done exactly what it was supposed to do. You can train your body to do extraordinary things. I believe that, I've seen it. But there's a kind of strength that no training drill can fully teach you. The strength to do nothing, precisely and deliberately, when everything in you wants to respond. That guardsman had it. And the man in the karate jacket found it out the hard way. Not by being overpowered, not by being shouted at or embarrassed in front of the crowd. Just by being looked at calmly, by someone who had absolutely nothing to prove.